This is Robert Clotworthy, and you are listening to Oak Island Plus, a discussion of Oak Island and other mysteries from around the world. Here are your hosts, James McQuiston, Oak Island theorist and author, along with John Hamels, PhD and historical researcher. Get the whole story right here, brought to you by Rabbit Hole Investigations.
Back to a much anticipated episode 32 of Oak Island Plus. It's been waylaid, as many of you may know, by factors that I would never have expected. As you know, Oak Island Plus was a partnership with Jim McQuiston and myself, and we lost Jim early December unexpectedly. And it's been quite a struggle getting things back on track. Then when I was ready to produce this particular episode, we're sitting here in the studio, which is a different studio than I have been working with Jim on, and we had a power outage right in the middle of the morning, then we had to reschedule again, so now we're 3-4 weeks later. So before I proceed on this episode, I want to personally thank so many of you that reached out to me personally and encouraged me to keep things going. Oak Island Plus was a collaboration that started when I first met Jim on, believe it or not, July 27, 2019, when we met right here in my local TV studio on my TV show called Chautauqua Sunrise. We almost instantly became friends and began sending each other text messages, and I mean text messages, I mean thousands of them over time, and our thoughts on the TV show The Curse of Oak Island. And from there on, the research drew me into going into all kinds of different topics. Jim was very concerned, of course, that there was so much information that we were discovering that maybe some of it would get lost and never make it on the TV show. By the way, that is correct, and therefore he wanted to capture this data in real time. So we chatted about developing a video podcast, which you're now watching part of, and that's what we did. And now here we are. I think we have 44 videos on our YouTube channel called Oak Island Plus. Some of them are musical, some are about his books and so forth, but this is a 30-second actual video that's historical, if you will. Then on January 13th, a Memorial Day for us, in 2023, over at Meter's Restaurant in Ripley, New York, we met for 2 days in the back room with sticky notes and tall bulletin boards, working to find various threads and connections to real people associated with the Knights Templar, the Knights Baronet, and of course Freemasons, which we then built a huge database. And when I mean huge, it was just hundreds and hundreds of names and family connections. We then were ready to talk to the world about our findings. We joined the Lakeshore Center for the Arts organization in Westfield, New York, and we took a 1-hour tutorial with Jackie Phillips on how to edit video, and the rest is history. Jim and I did a lot of hunting and searching on the computer. We had Randy Burt helping us on camera and so forth, and we did a lot of trial and error as we went along. So if you see our first video, it looks probably a whole lot different than our last one because we were getting better and better at it. What took us 2 days to produce one video took us like 2 hours after that. So on May 17th, 2023, which is almost 3 years ago, we launched Oak Island Plus. Jim was the deep diver, as I call it. He would go way into the minutia, and I was the so what guy. So what? He would come up with all this information and go, well, what does that got to do what we're talking about, or how's that fit in? So we would have this back and forth constantly challenging each other with data and information. He said the same thing to me. So what? You found out this little factoid. Where does that fit in? So where are we now? We stand at over 130,000 views of Oak Island Plus from around the world, and our Facebook page has a following of over 1,350 people. I guess we did something right. I think one of the things that Jim and I were most proud of was that we created an online library, a reference library, not so much for this Oak Island thing, but for Oak Island plus all of Nova Scotia and the history of the founding Nova Scotia over hundreds of years. we learn also that people were not necessarily enthralled with what they were finding on Oak Island, but they were more interested in the founding, in the history of Nova Scotia, like I just mentioned, plus where did Oak Island fit into all of that. So at this point, I'm preparing one more episode after today that I think will be quite an eye-opener in that it'll hopefully tie together a number of theories and complete the theory that Jim and I worked on and that he began years ago. You know, he had his first book called Oak Island Missing Links. And if you're interested, it's on Amazon as well as his other 13 books. And we always had this joke. Jim would say, "That's it, I'm done, last book." And he'd get it all done. Next thing I know, he got another book. All right, so this show is called Secrets Revealed. So let's jump right into it. So let's start out and let me explain a few things as we go. This episode is very much written in the first person of Jim's words. Jim and I would collaborate before we did a show. We would talk about the slides. I'd proof them and edit them and so on and so forth. We never got to it, all right? Jim had prepped all these slides before Christmas, and he sent them to me, and then, you know, we were preparing for the holidays, and we were going to film, I think it was on the 18th of December, and of course, as I said, we never got to that point. So I'm going to do the best I can to interpret what Jim wrote. I may even read it in first person as he wrote it, and then I will add my comments as we go along. Please be kind on the internet. I will do my best to use actual facts and dates and names. If I goof up, Jim's not here to help me out at the moment, but I'm sure he'll kick me somewhere during the show. All right, so Jim was friends with a number of theorists and always allowed them to share their thoughts, and he respected them. All right, and so kicking off the show today, two of these friends of Jim, and mine for that matter, Scott Clark and Jake Roberts, had given Jim some ideas that he followed up. So let's begin with the first slide, and I'll talk to you a little bit about this. Now, you might be looking at it and going, what in the world am I looking at? All right, what this is are the actual minutes of the Edinburgh Lodge of Scotland, #1, of the Masons meeting that was held in July of 1634. Now you might say, all right, now what is he talking about here? Well, this is the important date, and this is an important meeting, and it is an important document. And as Jim and I always prided ourselves on, we use primary sources. This is an actual document that's real, and you can find it, you know, online or wherever, and we're showing it to you right now. So what's going on here? This is where the first Freemasons were initiated, if you will, brought into this lodge of Masons. What's the difference? The 1600s, the 1500s, there were different lodges for mason workers, stone workers. And you might say, well, what does that mean? Well, it's much like today where we have the Brotherhood of Electricians or plumbers or carpenters. It's like a union, okay? And you had to be accepted as a journeyman, a beginner, and then become a master at your work. Well, three of these individuals that are going to be mentioned here in a moment were brought into the lodge, and they were not necessarily Masons themselves, but they were accepted as Freemasons or non-operative Masons. And it's pretty well documented that these three gentlemen were the first three Masons, then spawned other men that joined the Masonic group over time. All right, now, what's so important about these three men is that we have William Alexander Jr., who was the son of Sir William Alexander, who was the founder of Nova Scotia, or New Scotland in Canada. All right, so that was one son. Then we have Anthony Alexander, who at the time was the Master of Public Works, which was basically overseeing the stonemasons. Now, this was a royal position, you know, that was granted. And then we have Alexander Strachan. Now, if you have followed the story that we have laid out for you, Alexander Strachan was a pretty shady character. He stole a ton of stuff from George Keith, who was the Marshal of Scotland at the time, and Jim equated it to something like $3 billion in today's money. And we'll talk a little bit about this in the next slide, but not yet. But these three gentlemen became the first three Masons, Freemasons, if you will. So William Alexander Jr., Alexander Strachan, and Anthony Alexander in 1634. All right? So moving along, we then see what Jim has here. All right? And this is where Scott Clark, many of you may have seen this on the show, The Curse of Oak Island, where he talked about looking at a special A, all right, that he found on a particular map, all right? And that A, if you look at it, has this little funny bar, if you will, or whatever, all right? And he found this on the map of Mahone Bay, proposing that it was used in Freemasonry. Well, about a month ago, Jake Roberts emailed Scott and Jim to tell them the same A appears in the initiation of the first Freemasons, what we just looked at. So here's the same document again, and now look, you can see this A, or this barred A, if you will, in their initials. Now, a lot of people don't realize that the Masons would have their own symbol or their own mark, if you will, Mason's mark. If they were Masons, they would put these on their stone work, or they would put it in their letters. Because a lot of these guys couldn't read or write, but they could write their own symbol. So as you can see, Alexander Nesmith has a Mason's mark as the warden. Now, if you know anything about Freemasonry, there are different positions in a lodge, and warden is the name of one of them. So as you look through this document, you're going to see some of these barred A's, and very similar to what Scott Clark had talked about in the map back at the War Room on the TV show. So then moving along, we also will look at, there's some other ones here, all right? So in the next slide, Alexander Watt's mark is straddled by his name and features two crossbars, all right? So that was his deal. Possibly the linkage for a compass. Like in the Masonic, you have the square and compass. Then you have Andrew Simpson's mark, which looks similar to the Alexander Nesmith, but seems to have a much larger crossbar and another bar across the top. So people were using this A as their mark, but look at the similarity to that, to the Freemasonry there. Adam Walker, his mark specifically states that it's his mark, and so we can be sure that it was meant for him, although it looks like the same as Simpson's. Okay, so then over on the right, special A usage in early 1600s Freemasonry, we have examples of Adam Nesmith, Alexander Watt, Andrew Simpson, and Adam Walker. We also have William Alexander Jr., and Anthony Alexander. Then William's mark consists of all the letters of the name William and includes a special A, once again highlighted here in red, as you can see. Anthony's first appears as 3 X's, but also contains 2 A's, one marked in red and one in blue. So this is basically supporting what we're saying, is that this A seemed to become a popular mark for Masons and Freemasons, and it would make sense that we might see some of these actually on maps and perhaps documents that people would have used and to leave their mark. Okay? So Jim wanted to share that with you, the information that have discovered since our last video. One of the things that we've done in the past is, as we learn things, we try to bring it forward to you, and that was one of the things. All right, now, moving along, we noted that there were some things that were happening in the TV show that we found, and these are obviously up for speculation and your own observation and your own decision on whether it's true or not, but Jim and I pose these things as, what about this? So in this next one, we see the stone with the G on it, and many people that are familiar with Freemasonry know that the G stands for geometry. That would be the one after the one I just showed you, okay? There we go, thank you. And this G was on a stone there on Oak Island. And then they found this particular item below that, which was a T-square, and it was dated back to 1632. As you well know from our own work, that the Knights Baronet, who were the colonizers, they were the investors of Oak Island, that they were on the lands of Nova Scotia. They were colonizing it in the area, and that would include from 1628-ish to 1632. And William Alexander Jr. had all these gentlemen and workers in the area, and it could very well have dropped that or used that on Oak Island. Then, as we see here, that there was this thing that they called a hand cannon. And when we were watching this show, we said, okay, that doesn't look like a hand cannon. Not that we know everything about hand cannons, but once we saw it, we all kind of said, it looks like a plumb bob. And then we looked out on the internet, and a number of other people said the same thing. So Jim and I went to work, and we began to look for, what does a plumb bob look like? And next to what was found on Oak Island as a hand cannon are two examples of a plumb bob. Okay? Now, if you break away for a second, I have an example here of two modern day bobs. And I know you can't see this one, but it's just this little guy. I'll put this in front of my face so you can see it. And it's just probably lead. It has a little knob on it, and you would hang it on a string, and you might use it to try to line up a piece of wood or a pipe perhaps. And then a more fancier one, which is kind of in the same vein as the ones I show you here, is that this plumb bob was used to line up. Once again, you might use it to line up a wall, and you use it with a T-square or whatever to line things up perfectly, because when you have the plumb bob, it comes right down and is vertical, okay? And then you take your compass or whatever, and the T-square that we showed earlier. So if indeed the hand cannon was not necessarily a hand cannon, but perhaps it was a 1600s plumb bob, that would make sense, because now we got the symbol for the geometry, we have the T-square from the 1630s, and maybe a plumb bob. Then the next picture we have here is something they found, thank you, and everybody thought it was a compass, and I think we all thought it was a compass because it looks like a compass, but I believe that Carm Legg, he noted that it was a divider. And so I did a little research on the divider, and basically it's the first cousin to a compass, and it's used for construction and measurements and so forth, and it was definitely a tool of an operative mason, which could have been someone that came over back in the 1600s and used that for laying out who knows what, roads, buildings, wharves, whatever. So once again, that was just another document that was found on Oak Island. It connects with Freemasonry as a symbol. It connects with the stonemasons, now with the T-square, the G, potentially a plumb bob, and then a divider. That would have been something that these gentlemen would have brought with them from Scotland as they began to colonize and develop and build various things on Oak Island and in the surrounding areas. Okay, so as always, so what? So Jim writes, okay, combining the observation of Jake Roberts with the discovery of the Special A by Scott Clark, in the image of the earliest initiation of a Freemason, the man who also happened to lead the Scots in Nova Scotia, which has appeared in nearly all of Jim's books of Oak Island, then adding the Masonic symbols found on Oak Island, the potential of the Grand Master of Masons title actually appearing on the 90-foot stone. Got to go back to our 90-foot stone episode, and we'll explain that a lot. And the many clues that myself and Jim and I discovered about Masonic conspiracies, sprinkled with a dose of all the other clues of theorists who have pointed to a Masonic involvement with Oak Island as well as Nova Scotia, you end up with a nearly 100% conclusion that Freemasons or pre-Freemasons, or just Masons, stonemasons, were part of the Oak Island mystery from the very beginning. So Jim always poses the question, so if this isn't the case, How does anyone explain all that has been found? So again, we're always open to suggestions. Jim and I always were interested to hear from other people because we know we don't have all the answers. We're sitting over here doing research historically, but we're not doing the actual digging. So we hope that that kind of entices you to think about what was going on and that there was a connection with the Knights Templars, the Knights Baronet, who came over with William Alexander Jr. based on his father's royal patent to colonize Nova Scotia and other places, and then eventually the Freemasons. So it all comes together. All right. So moving along, Jim had written a book, all right, and this book was the book, we'll get to this in a minute, Anticosti, well, hang on a minute, all right. In his book, Oak Island, Mary, Queen of Scots, The Quest for the Golden Fleece, all right, he delves into the 90-foot inscription on the 90-foot stone, where he indicates a very different interpretation using the Mary, Queen of Scots cipher, which makes connections to the Knights Baronet and Freemasonry. All right, so if you haven't seen this book, this is on Amazon. You can get this, and it's extremely interesting, and he covers quite a few of these things that we're talking about today. But to see that Jim had bought, I don't know, like 100 pages of Mary Queen of Scots ciphers and then interpreted the 90-foot stone using that cipher really brought together names and individuals that were connected to the royal folks in Scotland, the knights and nobles, the Knights Baronet, those that were involved with Freemasonry and so forth, and the stonemasons. It all kind of comes together in that book once again. Okay, now we're ready for the next one. Now, a lot of people may not even be familiar with Anticosti Island. This island is very, very interesting and very, very important in the story of Nova Scotia and the research that we started to do before Jim passed away, in that this was the next angle. This was a very important spot in the fact that this is an island, very large island in fact, that sits in the very opening of the St. Lawrence River. It's above Nova Scotia, it's part of Nova Scotia. It's not near necessarily Oak Island, but it sits way out on its own. If you get a map out, you'll actually see where it sits. It's very strategic. So let me read what it says. So according to some research of our colleague Scott Walter, who based a lot of his research on Diana Muir's journals and diaries, he mentions that the Knights Baronet are connected with Anticosti Island in the fact that we were able to connect the names at the time that Scott was in our one interview and the work that we did. And this is where we're leading into our next show coming up. All right. So as I note, it lies in the mouth of the St. Lawrence River. Anticosti was a 1625 addition to William Alexander's original 1621 Nova Scotia grant from King James, and then it was followed up by his son, King Charles. While we're still studying Walter's research, we had already confirmed several Knights Baronet with land grants on Anticosti. We believe Anticosti is a Gaelic for Old Scots word meaning across from the coast. In fact, the lots of just across Anticosti, although on the Quebec coast, were considered as part of the Anticosti grants as well. So what we're saying is that this is important as we lead into more and more research, in that these families show up in the Weems and the Sinclair journals that I mentioned, that Diana Muir discovered and translated, and that we realized that these particular lots that were owned by the Knights Baronet through Sir William Alexander's patent, royal patent, they were there for military and control of the waters, okay? So they had lands in Quebec, Anticosti Island, parts of Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and so forth, and all through Mahone Bay. So these guys had a military presence, and they had a presence that were controlling the region. And we're going to talk about Anticosti next time, as I mentioned already, in greater detail, because I think you're going to find it that's very, very interesting. Okay, so let's bring up the next one where we talk about some matching information, and this is just a bit of a review. So in Walter's journal that was mentioned based on Diana Muir's work, they mentioned the Weems or Weems family and the Sinclairs, both Knights Baronet families. Okay, remember, they're mentioned in the early 1390s and then again in the 1600s. All right, these families had legitimate land grants on Anticosti Island based on official records. We have an old book that lists every knight baronet who received Anticosti land, and there was 34 of them, despite there only being 31 plots of land on the official map, as you can see above there. This could be explained by the fact that there were multiple members of the same families. For instance, the Campbell clan had 4 knights baronet and Anticosti. Now, oddly, while most of the places on the island have French names, one has the name of Camp Bell, presumably because it is a camp on the Bell River, yet it would be easy to believe the 4 Campbell, get that, Camp Bell or Campbell knights would have had some trace left behind. Also, there was a First Nations woman by the name of Cunham, and in Walter's book, again based on Diana Muir's work, the derivation of Cunningham, which is the name of another Anticosti knight baronet. So as you can see, as we go along, we're going to be realizing that there was lots of connections to more of a bigger story than what we first uncovered 3 years ago, and that we are seeing more and more of a connection of different theorists' work regarding Knights Baronet of the 1390s, and then the work that we came up with, and then the Freemasons thereafter. Okay? Then we put together a complete list, okay, and this is just for your own use if you're interested. These are the Knights Baronet who received land on Anticosti. They are just a part of more than 100 Knights Baronet who received grants in all areas combined. 100 grants all across Nova Scotia. 2 baronets were given land that included Mahone Bay and all the islands along the coast. So we've talked about this over and over again in our shows and in Jim's books. So here are the Anticosti knights, okay? And so it's broken down by dates, but the 1625 are probably the most important in my mind, because you got Sir Duncan Campbell, Innes of Roxburgh, Sir John Weems, James Weems was also part of that group. The Erskines, we did a whole show on Erskine, the Graham of Bracco, and so on and so on and so on. Then you see in 27, you've got Livingston and Cunningham, and then of course more Campbells in 28, and then there's just a whole crew. Now, the reason why I picked these names out particularly is because these names are going to pop up in our next show in more depth, because these were movers and shakers of what was going on in Nova Scotia, and there's a story within the story that we're going to be telling, okay? Then Jim points out with an arrow with Sandylands, the Lord Torpichin. This gentleman was involved with the handing over of the Knights Templar lands during the Mary Queen of Scots and so forth, and that's a whole story unto itself. But we were always trying to connect Mary Queen of Scots, the stonemasons, the lineage of many of these families that were connected to the Knights Templars, and then Knights Baronet, and then to the Freemasons. I know I repeat myself from time to time, but we have to keep reminding ourselves that this is interconnected, and we're going to see more and more of this as time goes by. So again, so what? So this is like listening to myself, because I always say this to Jim. So as we go along, we're going to see now in our next piece here that many of the Anticosti baronets' surnames provided Grand Masters of the Grand Lodge of Scotland. Okay, if we can bring that one up, please. 90 out of 110 Grand Masters have been from Knights Baronet families. If someone faked the journal, that would have had to have been done with some really deep research. Anticosti was strategically placed to guard the Gulf of the St. Lawrence. Okay, and there's a little map here we're going to pop here in a second. And the journal states that the several treasures were buried in several places for whatever reason. Okay? We're going to bring that slide up here in a second. Significantly, Anticosti's landowner, as I mentioned, Sir Walter Sandilands, or Lord Torphichen, was the heir of the man who turned the final possessions of the Templars and Knights of Malta over to Mary, Queen of Scots. Was first married to a Weems, a woman, and then to Catherine Alexander, as it turns out, daughter of William Jr., the first Freemason and leader of the Scots in Nova Scotia, and the granddaughter of William Alexander, proprietor of Nova Scotia. So once again, we're seeing all these names that are in common here, and we've got the name of Mary Queen of Scots, who was married to a Weems. We've got Catherine Alexander married in there. We've got William Alexander connected to all these different folks. So we were just taking a little pause here, and I'm waiting for this slide to pop up. Thank you. So again, we're in a different studio. There we go. Thank you so much. All right, so as you can see in that little map, there's Anticosti is right in the middle of the St. Lawrence, and then you have that Nova Scotia below that, and these were all areas where over these hundreds of Knights Baronet that bought and paid for lots in Nova Scotia began to colonize these places, and they were there for more than, I think, just colonization. I believe there was a higher purpose with some of these families, especially the names that I mentioned in the previous slide. So again, the reminder is that of the 90 of the 90 of the Anticosti baronets and the Knights Baronet, 90 out of the 110 Grand Masters of Freemasonry in Scotland were Knight Baronet families. Pretty significant. Okay, so let's go on to the next slide. And Jim talks about his book, and I'll read it to you. It says, in this book is presented a new cipher from the 1600s held by a man who was intimately involved in the theory of Mary, Queen of Scots, of Shakespeare, and of Thomas Howard, whose name may appear on the 90-foot stone, and of Freemasonry. And then Jim says that it was Judy Rudebush, and you know Judy, Curse of Oak Island. She's been on a number of times, and she talks about the Knights of Malta, who provided the original lead for Jim. She also confirmed something that Jim had previously heard about the only safe channel running from the ocean to Oak Island near Smith's Cove and up to the Gold River, where the beaver pelt business was abundant. And remember, we talk a lot about the beaver pelt industry being huge. 20,000 beaver pelts were taken out of that area in just 1 year alone. So there's too much to cover in today's show, but if you want to read a whole lot more about the incredible Oak Island as it's related to history and see how much of it connects, this particular book is a really good choice, and that Jim has written. And then Jim's going to give you a few more teasers here in a second. So as I was saying, the book is important if you want to look at it. That was Jim's last book. I've read it in depth, and it really does bring in some pieces that I think are important. The beaver trade, the fishing trade, the Queen of Scots cipher, and all of these very interesting gentlemen that are mentioned on the 90-foot stone, okay? All right, let's keep on going. So here's some more teasers, all right? And working along with Doug Kroll, Judy Rudebush, there we go, Tony Sampson, and some old charts were found. And it's been determined that any doubt that the only safe channel to cross Mahone Bay with a larger ship from the open ocean runs by Oak Island at Smith's Cove. Okay, this is entitled the Some Book Teasers, okay? And this proceeds right up to Gold River, where the research says that most lucrative beaver pelt trading took place. It is shown here in the 1960s chart, although we colorized it in a red line and extended up to Gold River. This explains why Oak Island was chosen out of all the 300 islands in Mahone Bay. I think we're having a little technical difficulty trying to bring up that slide. If we can get it, we'll get it up.
That slide for some reason.
Okay, thank you. All right, so we're missing that slide. So anyways, let me just read to you. You can't see this, but if you took a straight line, you could see this. So in the earliest books about New France, New England, New Scotland, and Newfoundland, they all allude to the beaver pelt being the new and very profitable golden fleece that we'll be talking about in a moment. Not yet, though. William Alexander had a monopoly on this trade, and the best place in the world for it was in Mahone Bay. He is the first person to have a beaver added to his coat of arms and was dubbed the Night Beaver. Okay, so let's see here. In Mary Queen of Scots cipher, you're going to see certain symbols referring to the man who was deeply connected to Mary Queen of Scots, and that was Thomas Howard. In the cipher also, you're going to see some special interest because of three ciphers that represents Thomas Howard, the Earl of Arundel, and the Grand Master of Mason. The point being is, in the book, you're going to see that Jim has pulled out some pieces that show you that these symbols, they weren't letters for letter, but for instance, if it was Jim, there might be a bagpipe. I'll make this up. Wherever the bagpipe showed up on an article, that meant Jim McQuiston, all right? Well, the same thing was true of Thomas Howard. There was a certain symbol for Thomas Howard. There was a certain symbol for the King of Scotland, for Scotland, and so forth. So Jim, in the book, once again, Oak Island, Mary Queen of Scots, The Quest for the Golden Fleece, okay? He goes into great detail on that. I apologize for the mix-up on the slides. We're, again, just testing out a new system here, so thanks for your patience. Okay, now let's go to the Golden Fleece, and I'll tell you a little bit about that, all right? So, got a little reading to do here. So, what's this all about, the Golden Fleece? 1609, a gentleman named Marc Lescarbot, or Gobat, a French author, wrote The History of New France. Okay, remember, New France was before Nova Scotia and New Scotland. They were trading lands and titles back and forth. It's a pretty complicated history of Nova Scotia. Here he mentions Canada's beaver trade. He explicitly uses the image of the Golden Fleece when describing the rush for beaver pelts going to conquer the Golden Fleece. All right, so beaver pelts, as I understand, and we did some research on it, as you treat and cure the golden fleece of these animals, it actually turns gold, the beaver pelts, okay? And they were highly prized in Europe for clothing and hats and all sorts of things. If you had something from beaver pelts, you were somebody special in those days. In 1616, another man the viewer may be even more familiar with is Captain John Smith. You've heard his name. Often erroneously yet romantically connected to the Indian princess Pocahontas. The gem that Smith left behind in his booklet entitled A Description of New England, Smith sang the praises of his part of the New World, and his book is said to contain the first known usage of the term New England. And an English poet named Richard Gunnell wrote an opening verse for Captain Smith's book. A line in his poem stands out: "Return as Jason with a fleece of gold, ranging the coast in a small boat. We have nearly 1,100 beaver skins." Okay. 1624, William Alexander wrote a book about Nova Scotia entitled An Encouragement to Colonies. This was sort of his come on over and settle in Nova Scotia promotional book. On the title page, directly under his name, can be found a Latin phrase which translates as, "There will be a new typhus and a new Argo to carry our chosen heroes." This is a direct reference to the story of none other than the Golden Fleece. That's symbology back then. In 1626, an acquaintance of Sir William Alexander authored another book, actually called The Golden Fleece. It was written by Sir William Vaughan, and yeah, he is related to the famous Vaughans of Oak Island. The elaborate book was published in 1626 under the pseudonym Orpheus Jr. Orpheus was a renowned poet, and traveled with Jason and the Argonauts in search of the Golden Fleece. Vaughan wrote in his book, though no gold nor precious stones were present, the value notwithstanding here is sent, a new found fleece to raise both arts and arms. In other words, the beaver pelt commodity able to raise money for craftsmen and artisans to create new wonders with enough left over to support the military. So the connection here is the golden fleece of its day, based on, old stories of Jason and the Argonauts. They're using symbology here. The golden fleece, the new commodity of gold, was beaver pelts. The earliest writers on New France, New England, New Scotland, or Nova Scotia, and Newfoundland all made mention of beaver pelts, indicating a connection to the replacement of the legendary golden fleece with a practical and plentiful item that brought great wealth to the old world. The best place in the New World to trade for beaver pelts was along the 45th parallel, also located just above Mahone Bay. And the best way to the interior was the channel that ran through the bay alongside Smith's Cove, Oak Island. And again, in the one slide that we couldn't show you, unfortunately, Jim discovered there was a waterway that was perfect for bringing in some bigger boats, bigger ships, to load up the beaver pelts and back to Europe. So in this whole story, we are working on the connection of what was going on during those years and these various stories about the Golden Fleece. And it's the story behind Oak Island, the story behind the founding of Nova Scotia, the story before Nova Scotia was Nova Scotia. And then later on, once the Scots were asked to leave by none other than Isaac de Razilli, that we know was from the Knights Malta in 1632, that Judy Rudovich talks about, and you've seen on the Curse of Oak Island, the Knights of Malta. Very important part of the story of Oak Island as well. These are all interconnected, okay? So our next slide, we just basically do a little bit of a wrap-up. So this was our intention. We intended to look at any connection Oak Island history and the founding of the United States, okay? So you might say, what are you talking about? There's a connection, which is something that's been talked about by so many other theorists. I didn't really buy this at first. I think I'm all in on this. This is especially significant as it's the 250th anniversary of the United States coming up. Jim and I also intended to take a closer look at the possibility of the voyage of Henry Sinclair back in the 1390s, 95 and 98, all right? We're starting to see some connection there, and then I'm going to talk about that next time. And then we'll probably have another show, Jim says this, okay, what's happening as we go along on the year and the season of the Curse of Oak Island, if we see something else going on. And beyond this, we have several people, and this is true, we've been talking about their information and theories. I just posted a video the other day with Jake Roberts and his show on my page there, Oak Island Plus, on our Facebook page. So as our friends have things to share, we're going to share it with you as well. And of course, there's all kinds of other things that are piling up that we want to get to. So I know this might have been a little different kind of show than you're used to because the technology that we're using and so forth, so thanks for bearing with me. This was a show about bits and pieces that Jim and I had talked about back in December and November that had popped up. Some of it is subject to interpretation and what you think as well. I hope you may have learned a little bit about some things that tie together. So I hope you picked up some more information from our historical point of view. My takeaway is, as much as we've talked about in the past, Nova Scotia includes Oak Island, not the other way around. And it was, ready for this, and I believe Rick Lagina picked this up from us, it's a multi-generational conspiracy of elites working to develop a new world, beginning with the Knights Templar, to the Knights Baronet, and to the Freemasons and others. Let me digress for a moment. Multi-generational conspiracy of elites. These guys were the Rockefellers, they were the movers and shakers of their day, the Kennedys, whomever you want, of Scotland, of France, okay? We got to put the Knights of Malta in there too. These are the guys that were looking for a better life. They wanted to discover a new world, to get out of Europe because of pestilence and disease, and they were using up the resources. They were, well, money hungry. Besides, on top of that, the kings were running out of the money. They needed more ways and resources. And so Nova Scotia was the prime place to go to and to pull those resources out. All right. I encourage you to go back to the episodes on Oak Island Plus on our YouTube channel to view deeper dives on these topics. It's a lot to digest, I understand. They're there for a long, long time, and I encourage you to share today's show with, if you will. It will not be on the YouTube channel. It will be on our Facebook page and a couple other places, all right? So thanks for your patience, and just before we sign off here, thanks to my crew here at XS Chautauqua Sunrise. They're at the XS Chautauqua Studios here in Mayville, New York. It's our new home. This is where we're going to be producing the next show as well. Jeff Zook, who's been very patient on the other side, trying to keep track of my slides. Justin and Randy Burt over here on my cameras, and Chris Burt, who's been doing production later on. So I'm Doc Hamels, and Jim McQuiston, who I know is looking over my shoulder right now. Until next time, take care. We're going to sign off now, and keep reading, keep watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
This is Robert Clotworthy, and you have been listening to Oak Island Plus, a discussion of Oak Island and other mysteries from around the world. Be sure to catch every episode.